Our next session, ladies and gentlemen, is called The New Workplace, Human Capital at the Center. And we have four very distinguished panelists who are going to tell us how the nature of work is actually evolving. We have Andrew Grant, who leads the public service practice of McKinsey globally and is a member of the global board of McKinsey. I'm actually going to keep the introductions very short because they're all so distinguished, and we'll make that out when they're up on stage. Apura Purohit, who is the CEO of Radio City and who's written a book called, very evocatively titled, Lady, You're Not a Man. She is from IIM Ahmedabad and is an alumnus. We have Venkatesh Kinney, who is the president of Coca-Cola India and Southeast Asia, and who was a graduate from IIM Ahmedabad. And finally, we have from our very own part of the world, Dr. Tan Si Ling, who is Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of IHH Healthcare. Interestingly, a person who is both a surgeon, a doctor, and has done his MBA. So he's got, I think, a multiplicity of perspectives to bring to this conversation. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Andrew Grant, who's our moderator, and the three panelists to come up, and I'm going to hand this off to them.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege to be with you this morning. It's fair to say that my fellow panelists and I, the notion that we're following legends, VJ and Richard, puts us in some degree of trepidation. Also for me personally, when I first moved to Asia, I was given a Chinese name. And my colleagues put a lot of thought into giving me a Chinese name that was august, that was appropriately prestigious. They did warn me that it was quite sensitive to getting the tones right. When I was first introduced in Shanghai a number of years ago, there was laughter and embarrassment in the audience, and apparently I'd been introduced as small donkey with learning difficulty. After Richard's presentation, I'm now nervous that I'm a small donkey with a learning difficulty who's protecting his groin, standing behind the podium. So I hope it gets better from here on in. So it's, fortunately, we have the role of talking to you this morning about the topic of the new workplace. And we do think, as business leaders, as folk doing dynamic things in the community more broadly, we do think the notion of talent and the new workplace is one of the most important topics that you have on your agenda. So fortunately, we have a topic that is, we think is particularly relevant. The way we will conduct the session, also given Richard's feedback on panelists, we've tried to real-time adapt a little bit to respond to his feedback. But I will set the context around some of the forces, some of the things we see at play around the new workforce. And then our panelists are going to talk what they are doing in their own organisations, what they're seeing, and as it were, offering you some solutions and some perspectives in terms of how you can respond to some of these trends that we're seeing play out. In terms of the trends that we are seeing, three broad areas. We're seeing some quite dynamic shifts in just the nature of the talent base around people. We're seeing some very significant shifts around the workplace itself. And as a result of that, how HR organisations, but particularly how the people function, how HR responds to that, we're starting to see some quite interesting things. In Asia, what is also exciting is that when you look at the fundamental nature of the marketplace in Asia, for the first time in human history, well, in modern human history, by 2020, 2021, there will be more talented college graduates in the developing world than the developed world. India and China being at the forefront of that. And you'll see from the slide behind me, India is the fast, not news to you, but India is the world's fastest growing talent market. Interestingly, also in Asia, when we do look at what's happening within those talent markets, India by, again, 2020, will be the world market that has the greatest surplus of talent. Indonesia, a close second. But in Asia, we also have the two countries with the greatest negative imbalance of talent, that being Taiwan and also Japan. So really, we are in the place where the action will be in the terms of the size of the talent market, but also the imbalances. We really do define the spectrum in Asia. We also know the mix of Generation Y and Generation Z, or millennials, now actually make up, and I'll set with the next slide, now actually make up more than half of the workplace globally. Generation Y and millennials now make up more than half of the workplace. And we know that they are actually more difficult to deal with in terms of the attraction and retention of the talent. They have different discount rates. Their barriers to moving are much, much lower. They want meaning, they want flexibility. And the panelists will talk some more about that. But we know it's a very different talent mix. And we as business leaders cannot just do the same things that we've done previously if we want to excite, retain, and develop that next generation of talent. We also know that they are not engaged. One of the statistics that I think is quite confronting, when you look at global engagement, how engaged are your employees? The global average for engagement is 11% of those employees that consider themselves actively engaged. I put up some of the statistics here in Southeast Asia, and you can see that in Singapore we're even below the global average with only 9% engaged. Malaysia a little better. Indonesia a little worse, Malaysia right on the global average. But we know engagement drives all of the good things we want around productivity and satisfied employees. We're not in a good place where we stand globally. One of the things that drives engagement, and that we know for Generation X and Y, more for Y and Z going forward, is this notion of flexibility. One interesting statistic, today in the US, there are about 35 to 40 million workers who work remotely, work in a very flexible manner. That's expected to nearly double over the next, by 2016, that number's expected to double. We're also seeing some interesting experiments. I give the example here of British Telecom, BT, who have done, with 70,000 employees, have done a very significant pilot around working from home. And they're finding dramatically improved outcomes. For example, for those on maternity leave, they're finding that they're having a 99% retention after the first maternity leave, given the sort of more flexible environment. We also know the very nature of how we think about managing people needs to change. If you look at this next slide, just shows that about 88% of organisations consider themselves that they are constantly in transformation, either preparing for a major transformation or are in the middle of it. Therefore, how do you lead that? How do you actually lead and develop and grow your people given that incredibly dynamic environment with a workforce that wants flexibility? Again, the challenges are going to be quite different and acute going forward. We also know looking forward that technology is going to play an even greater role. And therefore, the role that HR will need to play is less the full service administrative function, and actually someone that it behaves more like an advisor that pushes those activities back to the line, but also enables technology. Technology, not only in terms of social media and the way that social media is used to engage, that it no longer is just a one-way dialogue, but genuinely a two-way dialogue. But also, most interestingly, we think is this new area of HR analytics. Richard talked somewhat about big data and the role that big data is playing, but more the importance of how you draw the insight out of big data. One of the things that we are seeing is a big movement in the area of HR analytics, and the role that HR analytics will play going forward around how do you derive more insight around your employees, how do you transform the way you recruit employees, but also through wearables and other things, how do you also provide information to your own employees that helps them manage their own lives, their work-life balance, their productivity, and the like. And there are a number of, I won't go through them in detail, but a number of really interesting pilots, experiments that organisations are doing. Obviously, folk like Google are truly at the forefront, but also interesting new organisations like Evolve that are really making it their business to be at the forefront of this interesting area of HR and advanced analytics. And just to end before we start with our panellists, giving you a sense of some of the new roles, major roles that are being created in organisations, and three that we are seeing that I think are quite pertinent for you as leaders of large business organisations. One is the role, the head of HR analytics. It is a title that will become increasingly familiar to folk. Secondly is this notion of the chief learning officer. how actually are you really building human capital in your people, and also the notion of the Chief Cultural Officer. How are you building a culture that really is consistent with these new needs, wants, desires that we are seeing from Generation Y and from Generation Z going forward. So that is a whistle-stop tour of some of the context. Now that we have our panelists that will talk about what they're doing in their own organisations to respond to some of these challenges. And I'd ask Purva if she could kick us off in sharing.